Today on Jurassic World Architect, we tackle how you can make better use of those smallest members of your dinosaur community. Hello and welcome back to Triclaw Gaming with me, Fletcher. And today I am going to give you some tips and tricks to improve your use of the smallest animals that we have in the game. With the Malta DLC adding 3 small dinosaur species, and with a number of animals that we already had, these tiny creatures are in some ways very difficult to display, and while I think most of these animals need a better way of displaying them in gameplay, I want to give you guys some simple advice to maximize your tiny dinosaur enclosures. So let's get started, and please note that all these tips and ideas are primarily aimed at those that play in Sandbox. Number 1. Enclosure size. So this is a general thing that I think people get wrong when designing their parks, not just for those small animals but for larger species as well. Enclosures don't need to be huge to look good. I would argue that the larger the enclosure, the harder it is to design the park around it and to design the enclosure itself. When it comes to your smallest species, you don't need to construct huge enclosures. I find that enclosures that are around 2 maximum path lengths in diameter work very well, such as perfect squares, circles, and octagons. And if you need to know how you can make these sorts of perfect shapes, there'll be a video link up in the top corner for the first Jurassic World Architect video where I showed you how to do this. The smaller size of these sorts of enclosures helps to keep those smaller animals closer together and makes creating the surrounding enclosure easier. Note that this works well for enclosures where all you have in them is the small species. If you're going to have a mixed enclosure with larger animals, I'd suggest expanding the size. This size of enclosure is easily big enough for a large group of these animals, at least 5 or 6, without feeling overcrowded. Number 2. Viewing these animals. One of Jurassic World Evolution 2's general problems is that the scale of the game is all geared around the largest of animals and locations. The viewing galleries and towers are simply huge, and to see something the size of the viewing gallery placed to view an animal the size of a chicken is frankly a little strange and a bit unrealistic. So how do we go about viewing these animals? I think that animals of this size are best viewed from the path. This is of course a totally imaginary way of viewing animals since paths don't provide viewing opportunities. However, a lot of Jurassic World Evolution 2 requires imagination to get the most out of it. There are various methods of achieving this, and it depends whether you have mixed eras or not. Whether you have path around the whole of the enclosure or just along one side, the use of low wall decorations is a great way of creating viewing areas. Planters are good to use here, as well as the mortar wall sections. If you're using mods, you can use these in combination with the invisible fences to prevent animals from escaping. And without mods, you can still place most of these decorative parts close enough together to prevent animal escapes. In regards to tours, again, most of them are suited for large animals from a realism perspective. I think the best tour system to view smaller animals like this is the gyrosphere ride. The all-round glass sphere works very well for animals that are so small they don't reach the top of the wheels of the other tour ride systems. Finally, thinking of the viewing dome and viewing log, I think both of these also work very well for small animals, given that they can get quite up close and personal. Number 3. Designing the inside of the enclosure. This is the area of creating small animal enclosures that needs the most care. The first tip in this regard is to prevent using the terrain brushes as much as humanly possible. The simple fact is that those brushes create a very tall and very full coverage planted area that makes it almost impossible to see these animals. I would start by deciding where you're placing the water. These small animals can't walk through it, so stick to small ponds or place water along the viewing area you've created. I would then decide on a specific ground texture, preferably not all grass but a mixture of textures. I would keep grass to a specific area, probably away from where people are viewing the animals from, perhaps towards the back of the enclosure. This is where you would also put your biggest foliage. When placing the rest of the rocks and foliage, stick to manually placing plants and trees, but again be careful not to overdo it. Too much foliage will hide the animals too much. There is a number of useful plants here, such as low bushes, shrubs and ferns. I would also suggest using smaller tree varieties that don't create too much shadow over the enclosure that will again hide the small animals. If you're using herbivores like Lystrosaurus in the enclosure, keep their food in small pockets around where your biggest foliage is. keep it away from the water so that you stimulate the AI of the dinosaur to move the animal around the enclosure to satisfy its needs. Remember not to overdo it. When it comes to carnivores, place feeders in positions that are not buried within foliage and preferably inside of those viewing areas. The final thing I'd like to mention in this part is that you can use various decorative parts to further enhance these enclosures, again if you're using your imagination. For example, the Malta Castle Tower does have an entrance door that is easily large enough for these animals, and thus you can place it down as a pretend safe area for animals to rest and to sleep. Decorate the surroundings of the tower with plants, but leave the door mostly clear. Fountains can also be pretend water baths. If you're using mods, plants and decorations with plants can be sunk slightly into the ground to create pretend special feeding places for herbivores. Again, much of this requires the use of imagination, but then so much of Jurassic World Evolution 2 requires it. Number 4. Skin use. When it comes to the animals themselves, there are some other ways you can help improve your small animal enclosures. Firstly, keep to bright skins that are very visually distinctive from surrounding terrain. Avoid dark colours and greens. Secondly, if you're going to have several different skin colours on the animals, make them distinct from one another in order to make them stand out further. Let's look at a couple of examples. Starting with Oviraptor, I would stick to the main skin colours of Yukon River, Amazon rainforest and mangrove forest, whose colours are bright and distinct from the rest of the colours of your environment. In regards to Compsognathus, Svalbard, Kilian Mountains and Amazon rainforest work well. Take your time to find some nice skins that will really work using the species skin viewer. So that was some tips, tricks and ideas to help you build enclosures with these smaller animals in mind. If these tips helped you, leave a comment down below, and while you're there, give us a like and subscribe if you're new for more content from all of us at Triclaw Gaming. Until next time, stay safe and goodbye.